the Hanging Gardens of Babylon may have been in Nineveh. Where do we know Nineveh from? We know it from the Old Testament, the prophet Jonah, who was given a message to deliver to the people of Nineveh, to the city of Nineveh, that because of their sinfulness that God would do away with them, and he left and was swallowed by the whale. Well, that was the Nineveh that we're talking about now. Of course, it was saved because from the king to the last animal there, they all fasted for 3 days, believing in what prophet Jonah told them. So they repented. So the Hanging Gardens here of Babylon may have been in Nineveh, of Babylon. As Babylon rose towards heaven like a mountain, its exotic trees grew lush and tall on its highest tier. Greek historian of the Hellenic Age named this stunning paradise one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Scholars are sure that six of those wonders existed. However, the famous gardens eluded historians for millennia. So where were they? Did they exist? One researcher thinks she may have solved this mystery. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon rose towards the heavens like a mountain. Its exotic tree grew lush, tall, in the highest tier. Greek historian of the Hellenic Age named the stunning paradise of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Legendary origin of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. One of the popular legends about the garden says that King Nebuchadnezzar II, about 605 to 562 BC, of Babylon, built them for his homesick wife, Amytis of Media, of Persia. Amytis missed the green mountains of Persia. The legend places the garden about 50 miles south of Baghdad, in present-day Al-Hilal, Babil, Iraq. Unfortunately, there are no records, inscriptions, or archaeological evidence in Babylon to support this story. And tracking down where these hanging gardens were. Mesopotamia's Fertile Crescent, where Babylon existed, was a highly tumultuous area in history. Civilizations rose only to collapse under the often ruthless conquests of the more powerful ruler. The wars destroyed palaces, temples, records, and city structures. As such, all traces of the Hanging Gardens may have disappeared, leaving us no archaeological evidence. It's also possible that historians may have gotten their facts wrong or fabricated specific details. Writers often mixed myths and legends in with history or distorted the facts to support their agendas. Additionally, although ancient writers did mention impressive gardens, only a few fragments remain due to the widespread destruction of these ancient texts. Therefore, it is not easy to trace the descriptions back to the oldest and presumably most reliable sources. Of the extant fragments, those that exist, from whom each version derived becomes clouded in multiple copies throughout the years, still some realistic facts may have survived in the subsequent works of the authors. Details of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Tracking down the first credible description of the Hanging Garden of Babylon is difficult. Perhaps the oldest comes from Ctesias of Cnidus, who lived in the 5th century BC. Only fragments of his work survived, but none regarding the Gardens of Babylon. According to Pliny Net, Diodorus Siculus appeared to have used Ctesias's version closely. Therefore, through Diodorus, we still have his description of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Scholars believe that Ctesias attributed the garden to the Assyrian regent Queen Semiramis, aka Samuramat. She was famous for her leadership and many improvements to Babylon in the 9th century BC. Diodorus counters this by saying that it was not Semiramis who built the gardens, but a Syrian king who came later. Diodorus's detail about the garden exists in his Bibliotheca Historica, Book 2, Chapter 10, on Perseus, Tufts in Greek, a full translation by Irving Finkel. He's, as we know, the British hieroglyphic expert. Full translation by Irving Finkel can be found on Pliny Net, and the following is a paraphrasing description. The garden was square, with sides that were 400 feet long. Like a theater, it had tiers that rose up in height to the top terraces, which was 75 feet high, the same height as the city walls. Each tier was supported by a vaulted gallery underneath it, with 14-foot long by 4-foot wide stone beams. Reeds in thick bitumen overlay the beams, with 2 additional layers of baked bricks cemented together and a layer of lead to waterproof the ceiling. Above the foundation, a deep layer of dirt grew many types of trees that were either strictly large or beautiful. The abundant water came from the river and flowed through a sophisticated mechanical system that ran up a hidden conduit in one of the galleries. What other historians had to say? Subsequent writers such as Strabo based their descriptions of the gardens in Babylon on Clitarchus. Philo of Byzantium provides a similar account to the one above. However, he says the irrigation came from a high level and flowed down into the garden. Quintus Curtius Rufus, 1st century BC, also described the hanging gardens based on Clitarchus's work. Then there is Verosius, who sometimes gets credit for the oldest version. However, his copy does not exist, and there are some speculations that later authors added details about the garden to Verosius' material. On the other hand, in the 5th century, Herodotus wrote in explicit detail about Babylon's walls, roads, and waterways. Nonetheless, he failed to mention any gardens at all. Regardless of all the confusing fragments, there are some inscriptions and reliefs from the Neo-Assyrian capital Nineveh that detail a unique garden. These inscriptions, coupled with archaeological evidence, also suggest an impressive artificial irrigation system. Hanging Gardens of Nineveh. The Assyriologist from Oxford University, Dr. Stephanie Daly, can read ancient cuneiform inscriptions, and she has proposed a theory that overturns conventional thinking. It was the Assyrian king Sennacherib, 705 BC to 681 BC, who created the hanging gardens in Nineveh, about 340 miles north of the city of Babylon. Part of the evidence for this lies in Sennacherib's records. Archaeologists found stones, prisms with cuneiform text in the ruins of his palace. When Daly translated the cuneiform, she discovered something intriguing. The king tells of the exotic trees and plants in the garden near his palace. He detailed his invention of a mechanical device that carried water up to the garden's highest levels all day. Daly believes he may have invented an Archimedes-type screw. Sennacherib's annals, in the form of stone prisms, are still extant today. They still exist today. Daly provides a translation excerpt in her book, The Mystery of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and this is what she writes. I created clay molds as if by divine intelligence for cylinders and screws, tree of riches, in order to draw water up all day long. I had ropes, bronze wire, and bronze chains made, and instead of a sadoof, I set up the cylinders and screws of copper over cisterns. I made those pavilions look just right. I raised the height of the surrounding of the palace to be a wonder for all peoples. I gave it the name Incomparable Palace. A high garden, Kirimahu, imitated the Amanus Mountains I laid out next to it, with all kinds of aromatic plants, orchard of fruit trees, trees that enrich not only mountain country but also Chaldea, Babylonia, as well as trees that bear wool, cotton perhaps, planted within it. Irrigation issue. According to Daly, scholars believe Sennacherib's garden would have required about 300 tons of water every day, each day. However, archaeological evidence shows us exactly how he irrigated such an enormous landscape. Satellite images reveal a canal system approximately 60 miles long that ran from the mountains at Kinis to Nineveh. This system diverted about half of the river and routed the water to the capital city through the Jerwan aqueduct, which consisted of about 2 million stones. Portions of this aqueduct still stands. Proud of his engineering feat, King Sennacherib signed the aqueduct with his inscription. King Sennacherib, of the world king of Assyria, over a great distance I had a watercourse directed to the environs of Nineveh, joining together the waters. Over steep-sided valleys I spanned an aqueduct of white limestone blocks. I made those waters flow over it. Gardens of Sennacherib's wall reliefs. Sennacherib also recorded his achievements in pictorial bas-reliefs that decorated his palace. In fact, the records of the British Museum contain an exact drawing of one of his reliefs, which is now lost. It shows a tall garden in levels and an arched aqueduct that provides the water to the garden. Additionally, in the upper right-hand corner, colonnade supported the terrace garden. This resembled the author's description of the 14-foot-long stone beams supporting each level of the garden. Pondering the location. Was it Sennacherib's hanging garden that became the world wonder? Nobody knows for sure. Perhaps there were multiple gardens worthy of distinction. After all, beautiful gardens were not uncommon in Mesopotamia. The female ruler who later became known as Semiramis may have indeed built wondrous gardens. However, writers who came during the Hellenic Age, gave descriptions that bear similarities to Sennacherib's inscription and bas-reliefs and the machinery that hoisted water, the rise like a theater, the stone pillars, the variety of plants and trees. If the hanging gardens never existed in Babylon, how did ancient historians get it so wrong? Babylon was a city. However, during various periods, the Babylonian Empire, or Babylonia, grew or shrank depending on conquests. Similarly, the boundaries of the Assyrian Empire fluctuated. Sennacherib crushed Babylon and took over the city, becoming king of Babylon. In the same century that Sennacherib died, Babylon conquered Nineveh. Could ancient historians have confused Nineveh's gardens as being in Babylon because they thought of Nineveh as being part of the Babylonian Empire? Thanks to Dr. Daly and other archaeologists, there are more clues today that hint at the prior existence of a wondrous garden, not in Babylon but Nineveh. Whether or not it was the hanging garden that made the top 7 list of ancient wonders, we may never know, but all the best evidence on hand today points to Sennacherib's capital city of Nineveh, of course. This was published originally on Historic Mysteries. It's on Collective Spark. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.